Thanks everybody for joining us. So this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody in this room if you've ever worked in a large enterprise. As employees of ThoughtWorks, we're often called in to help people to do technology things, or give me continuous delivery. But eventually what happens is we hit a brick wall where we can't progress any further. And it's not because people aren't necessarily smart enough, that we don't have enough money to buy the right technology. It's that the organization itself isn't aligned to actually use the technology wisely. So this is what we want to address today. So start off, Mary alluded to this earlier this morning about the average lifespan of organizations and large organizations. This is the S&P 500. So a guy called Richard Foster did an analysis of the last 60 years. In 1955, the companies that were on this list had an average lifespan of over 60 years. So they'd been in business for 60 years. By 2010, that had dropped to less than 20 years. So the people or the organizations that came on that list, and it was list, Fortune 500, included companies such as Apple, Netflix, Amazon, eBay, some that had come and gone during that time, Palm, Compaq, and remarkably, there was one organization that's been on that list since 1926, I believe, when the list started. Anybody guess what it was? GE? I heard GE. Yeah. And GE was a very different company in 1923 than what they are today. So today they make most of their revenues through their credit and financial departments and not by producing electronic appliances. So they've changed with the time, and that's what's kept them on. So what's driving this? His premise, Richard's, it's the use of technology. It's driving the lifespan of companies down. So when we talk about organizations, what we have is a management and organization structure that actually, is this playing? It is, okay. So we designed it that it's predictable. If I push the pendulum one way, I can predict what's going to happen, and I know how far it's going to swing. However, as we introduce technology, we have more data, we have more complexity. What happens is that I don't have that predictable cause and effect anymore, right? There's more moving parts, and I can't tell, really, which way this thing is going to swing. So I'm using management and structure and processes that were designed for that predictability, when in reality, this is what is happening. So just to verify, these things that we were thinking about, McKinsey came out with a survey results earlier this year that says, ask big companies, what are the challenges you're facing in the digital space and the use of technology? And remarkably, up there, there's nothing about, I don't have the right technology to do the job I want, right? There's a little bit about finding talent, particularly if you're a smaller organization. But really, the big challenges are that my organization structure is not designed for appropriate use of digital space, right? I'm designed to work with physical assets, not digital assets. The second one is that the business processes that we've designed within our organization are very inflexible, and they don't allow us to move fast enough. And then the third one is that we have a complete inability to adopt an experimental mindset within our organization. So I believe it was Marty earlier alluded to the fact that most larger organizations are designed for efficiency. What have we got? How can we make it better? They're not designed to, can we actually produce a whole new entire market? So that's the problem today.
So I'm going to help tackle a couple of these areas and give you some ideas of what's happening and what's going on. And the first one we're going to talk about is organization structure, and then sort of secondary factors around decision making and talent. This was the worst creation society has ever come up with. Think about, when was this created? In the 1950s? Before that, when the first S&P came up. And it talks all about structure, information being pushed down. Now, the challenge we've got today is this structure is actually run by these people. Hippos. The highest paid person's opinion. What they believe to be true. Telling us how it works. What I should be doing. But this time is gone. We're in too complex world for people at the top to have all the context to make the best decisions as we move down. And if you're even more lucky, you get one of these. As Marty was talking about earlier, the flying hippos that come in and actually poop gold. These come in to optimize these kind of structures and systems and working rules, because that's what the business wants. But that's not reality anymore. Those times are gone. What we really have now is this. It's a networked community, and this is really how organizations are starting to be structured now. How are people connected to one another? How do they transfer information around the network? Now, the best companies have open networks, clear communication, transparency, high-quality data moving around them. And the people then who receive that data are making good decisions on real data. Not the right message to say, but the correct data. And that fosters that ability to make better decisions. Also, you start to think of people as sensors. This is a sensor network, listening for adaptive changes in your market, in your business, in your processes. And these people are knowledge workers. They have context now. They have more context than the flying hippo. They know the best decisions to make. So we need to create a system that allows these people to be empowered to make the best decisions, but also to be aware when they need to bring in people to help make that decision. The right decision at the right time, at the right level. So how do you sort of lead these networks? And that's the bigger challenge. Again, people think the command and control came from the military, but they actually started to abandon that in the 1800s after the Napoleonic War. They started to understand that when people are faced with ambiguous situations, emergent opportunities or threats, they don't have time to sit down and write a 400-page business case, send it to the next hippo to send to the next hippo to bring it back and make a decision at speed. The opportunity's gone. They need a framework for making decisions, not rules, but principles to guide them. And this is where the idea of the principle of mission is really important. What is the key outcome that we want to achieve? What is the high-level objective that we're working towards as an organization, as a group, as a unit, as a team? So when I'm faced with an ambiguous situation, I can refer to the key outcome I'm trying to achieve and make a decision based on what that framework allows me to do. And that allows me to move at speed. Fundamentally different from a command and control approach. But then there's two different things that help organizations go through these cultural transitions. And this is some of the work by Edgar Schein. And he talks about two little buttons to press, two hot pots. One of them is survival anxiety. Now, this is when it's the fight or flight. We're in such a huge problem, we have to do something about this. Good example is IBM in the 1980s. They thought they wanted to be number one, shareholder value, build the biggest business, get as many people as we can, and they realized it was failing and killing their business. So they had to create a sense of urgency to kill off different parts of it so they could move forward and survive. But that can only work for so long. When you actually start to need to build an adaptive culture where people can respond to changes in the market, you need to reduce the learning anxiety, the fear of experimenting and trying new things out. If I fail, I will not be treated badly. I need to reduce that inertia of anxiety about learning. And then you can see how all these things start to reinforce each other around, and captured nicely in Dan Pink's model. Purpose. Clear objectives that people are trying to achieve. Autonomy. I'm not in a command and control environment. I'm an empowered individual in a network to make decisions. And mastery. That ability to experiment, that I have no learning anxiety, that I can start to move myself forward.
So I'm just going to talk now about this area we call flexible business processes. And I have to tell you this quote that I remember so well when I was at Lean Kanban 14 earlier this year in San Francisco. Beate Bourget was there from the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, and one of the participants in the audience stood up and said, "I hate the budget process with the passion of 1,000 burning suns." And I thought, You know, a lot of people share that feeling. Okay, so what happens with our business processes? Basically, in this command and control, highly centralized organizations, which many large organizations are about, there is this structure where everything moves down from the top, okay? The executives say, this is going to be our strategy, this is how we're going to align all of our teams, and they're usually aligned around functions rather than products, and we talked a lot about that earlier this morning. And then you guys at the bottom, you little peons, you do the execution as we tell you it should be done. Now, Barry alluded to the fact that these are the people who actually, because of their networks, know where the real problems are, know where the bodies are buried, and they know what would work best, but they're not given any autonomy to make decisions and to how to make it work better for them. It's all, you've got to follow our process, you've got to follow our rules. What happens then is as it filters back up, the accountability, goes down to the bottom people. You didn't meet your targets. Well, we didn't set them, and you can get back and forth into this conversation. But the thing is that a lot of people feel that micromanaging and going from top down actually elicits more control. In reality, what it does is you start to lose control because people either become apathetic and automatons, they just do what they're told and they don't care about the outcomes, or they start to rebel and they find ways to subvert all the processes so that you actually become far riskier because you have no idea, no visibility into what's going on. Okay, and this comes from the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable website. So they talk about targets, incentives, budget contracts, balance scorecard, blah, blah, blah. If you haven't gone there to look at it, I highly, strongly recommend you do. And I want to tell you a funny story about how subversion can work. So we were with a company that produced widgets off a manufacturing line. The targets and incentives from the top were that if you finish a widget during your shift, you people at the bottom, we'll give you a little bonus. So one team, towards the end of the shift, came that close to finishing the widget, right? And they said, okay, we're not giving the bonus to the next team coming on shift. We've got to hide this widget till we come on the next shift. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pull the widget out of hiding and finish it so we get the bonus. Now, the funny part about this whole story is, oh, I forgot to tell you about that. Sorry, but I'll show you what the widget looked like. Okay, so all the effort to hide this thing, subvert the whole process, it probably costs far more than the actual incentive to begin with. So that's how badly it can go wrong. So how do you fix that? Clear accountability maps for self-managed teams. Autonomous but aligned. If you've seen the Spotify videos, you know how this works. But basically, you still need executive teams to define, what's the direction that this company is going, and give everybody that principle of mission. You align your teams with value centers rather than functional teams, and so that, we talked earlier about cross-functional teams and having more than just engineers on a product team. And then those teams know their customers best. They're more closely aligned with the customers, and they know what's going on. They are given the authority through principles rather than rules to make decisions. They're also given boundaries. So these are the boundaries that you probably shouldn't cross in your decision-making that need to be filtered up. But it's a more horizontal view of an organization rather than a top-down view. And then you'll still have other departments that support. Sometimes those people will be members of products teams. Sometimes they may be kept separate. But it is, they are still measured, and they still have the same principle of mission as the value teams. Okay, so I want to talk about one agency. It's a government agency. If you think big, think government, right? This is the UK Gov. They were in a lot of trouble. So projects gone by, National Health Services, this was an effort to computerize all medical records of every British citizen. They started out in 2002. We have a budget, £2.3 billion. 2011, still not done. £10 billion later, only 55% of the medical records in place. There's a huge big black eye for the government, Does this sound familiar for people who are US citizens? Right? Okay, so they've been there before. They should have known. Anyway, and they also had another problem that they had two distinct websites, DirectGov and BusinessLink, that also dealt with support services for citizens. What happened was that they hired Martha Jane Fox to sort of do a review of what went wrong. She wrote a report. All this is available on public domain on the internet. And basically, she gave them their mission, their mission, right? Make this as simple as possible for citizens. Make their life simpler. That became the principle of mission for the organization. Okay, the other bonus was that if we can reduce complexity as to how we deliver these services, people will use them more and will reduce costs, plus we can turn things off. Now I say we reduce costs as citizens use the digital services more because the other venues for getting services, face-to-face, on the phone, or by mail, are very expensive compared to digital services. So this was their principle of mission for the whole teams. They then set up teams that are aligned, but what they said is we're going to put everything, one homepage, I can access everything that the government needs as a citizen. I can find the policies, I can find the rules, I can find the forms. I have 24 ministries, over 300 different agencies, all accessed through one website with a common user interface. So as they built this, you know, and everything's completely transparent here. So one of the things they post is their digital transformation scorecard. You know, how are we doing moving those ministries into this website? And you can see how they adapted sort of that waterfall approach of I need my requirements, design, build, test, release, into we're going to change it a bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a discovery phase where we get that shared understanding of what we're trying to do for this ministry. Then we're going to do an alpha where we do some prototyping and make sure that we're still talking the same language and that it's actually going to work for the ministry and for some of our citizens. Then we'll put it out in beta where some public can access it and give us the feedback. And then we go to live, okay, full production. But the key here is it doesn't change, it's not finished then, it still keeps changing, right? So it's a continuous improvement cycle that they go on. They also said for processes, we're going to obliterate all those rules about, you know, have to build the requirements, have to build the business case, have to go get the funds, blah, blah, blah. And this is what we're going to do. So we don't want to slow down delivery, so the way you do work, we shouldn't slow each other down. We have the discussions at the right level and the decisions at the right level. Do it with the right people. Go see for yourself. So ministers are often go look at the teams that are building it. Teams go talk to the citizens that are actually using it. Do it only if it adds value, and trust and verify each other and also what you do, okay? So that actually helped them improve the process of delivery quite significantly. They're completely transparent with the citizens and each other. This is where we're at today. They do these updates weekly. Their teams are blogging on how they work and what they've discovered, what their failures are. There's nothing hidden, okay? Now what they found was that in order to go further, they had hit a brick wall with how they award contracts. So they said, you know what? We've got to completely change the way the UK government does procurement in the digital space. So there was a lot of press around this, but basically, Big IT failed them. It cost them a lot of money. So they completely changed the contract process, and some of the new principles they put in were no contract will be over £1 million in value. If it's over £1 million, it has to be an exceptional case, and that will go through a review process. The other thing is no contract will be longer than 2 years. So the duration of the contract is shortened quite significantly. And then the third one, no automatic contract extensions. I love this one, because I used to deal with suppliers and they go, oh, you missed the date, therefore we renewed the contract. And guess what? It's at a new rate. And you go, oh, well, that was silly of us, wasn't it? But you're tied in because it was a legally binding contract at that point. And in reality, you know what? Radical rethinking of how we do our business. This requires really courageous leadership to do this, okay? And that's probably what a lot of organizations are missing today. Now, no surprise for this audience is that people are trying to copy that. I think it'll be interesting to watch how the US government builds its digital space, mostly because the UK and the US are very different environments, different political environments, different financial environments, and I think it'll be a very different story for them. And just to say, you know, we're going to talk about, I had the privilege of working at WestJet, which is a Canadian airline that modeled the Southwest airline. And I have to tell you that it was totally refreshing. But one of the things that Southwest has done, apart from all the other innovations, they've been around for 41 years and have actually been financially successful every one of those years. So which in the airline industry, that's quite remarkable. But the planning, the budgeting, they don't have that big annual event where everybody lines up at the starting line and races to see if they can get the biggest share of the pot of gold that's on display that year, okay? What they do is 12-month rolling forecasts, and you know, you have to manage your costs, but any new initiative can be implemented at any time of the year, and you don't have to wait for that capital expense process to go. So there's a lot of organizations that are looking at these financial management processes and the procurement processes that impede our ability to actually improve in the digital space.
We've talked about organizational structure, we've talked about improving processes, but probably one of the most fundamental shifts is the shift in mindset. The key component for innovation and growth is that ability to start to experiment, to learn. This is one of my favorite quotes, and it really captures the essence of the human condition. We have this loss aversion with the world. We seem to have to know with certainty what's going to happen. And the way I guess we see this illustrated in our day-to-day business lives is the planning process. You think about the fuzzy front end of most organizations, where often we spend half of the budget making the plan better, adding more detail to the plan, adding more certainty to the plan. No plan survives contact with customers, not anything I've ever done, not the first one. It's a learning process. You need to start to get into that experimentation mindset. But we have all these natural biases that we seem to live in. This is a fun thing I like to do with people. So look at, what do you see up here? You see like a couple of things based on your knowledge of the world, your experience of the world, your deep understanding of the world. What do you see up here? Can you see two different squares, A's and B? What do they look like? What do you think about them right now? I'm actually going to put this in another context. Let's pretend this is a business case, and we've two products to bet on, A and B. And the darker the shade, the more valuable the item is. Which is the more valuable thing to do? A or B? A, obviously, of course. And how much would you bet on that? $1? $1,000? $1 million? $100 million? Because that's what people do. They look at the information presented to them, and that's the first bias. We make decisions on how information is presented to us, and we make big decisions, big bets, $100 million bets. Or we could test the hypotheses. We could actually test our underlying assumptions about what we think by making a simple, small experiment. I'm going to take a little piece, and I'm going to compare it to the other piece. They're exactly the same. Your mind is playing tricks on you. It's an optical illusion. You don't believe me? Look. And look. We need to get comfortable with being wrong, because our hypotheses are always, more often than not, wrong. Microsoft have a great report done by Kofi Havi, where the team looked at all the work that they did. And they found, for all the work, 1 in 3 of the pieces of functionality had a negative effect on the key metric it was trying to move. 1 in 3 had no impact on the key metric. Only 1 in 3 had a positive impact on the metric it was designed to improve. 66% of the time, you could be wasting your time. So I'd just like to talk about another great example of a hypothesis and a huge bet that went wrong. I'm going to make a $100 million bet that I can deliver a service where anybody who wants to find out about healthcare can go and find about it. And you know what? I'm going to tell everybody about it before we even start. I'm going to fall into the planning fallacy because I know it's going to cost $100 million to build. That's what I'm going to do. Roll forward a couple of months. Here we are. Changing 3 different suppliers. 3 times they've had to change different people to work on it. But we made a commitment. We had a plan. And now we've fallen into the sunk cost fallacy, where we just have to keep putting good money after bad to get this thing done. A $100 million bet has now become a $600 million piece of work. Is that really where we wanted to get to? So what's an alternative approach? And this is why experimentation is really important. Because the goal is not to actually create certainty, it's to actually reduce uncertainty. And if we can start to do that, the best way is to conduct experiments. Now, a $100 million experiment is a pretty big experiment, if you ask me. And as Jeff Pat says, if you only do it once, it's not iterating. Marty talked about companies with their 4 months to 6 months iteration cycles. I go and see companies that can deploy maybe once every 2 years. They have no hope against people who are working around a continuous deployment model. Small changes, fast changes, measuring outcomes, understanding outcomes, using that information. The pace that you learn at leaves your competitors dead. They're the companies that used to be on the S&P 500 that aren't there today. And I just want to show you how the gov.uk did this. And because I think it's really interesting how they started. They didn't go 100 million, big broadcast, 25 different suppliers. How do you think they started? 14 people, a budget of £250,000 and 8 weeks. They created a safe experiment, an investment that they were happy to do to get information to make an evidence-based decision on should they go forward. Could they bring the sites together? Could they make DirectGov work with Business Park? Could they prove the model? And if they could, then invest further. If they couldn't, they had limited the cost of that experiment. So I just want to leave you with a couple of things then for what you can do tomorrow, because it's always nice to leave with a few ideas. Set people up for success. Think about the principle of mission for your organization, for the team that you're leading. Communicate that to people. How can you move to a network world rather than a command and control world? And then drive those decisions down to the appropriate level, to the people with the right context to make better decisions. Mary talked about this earlier, about considering the end-to-end flow of value through your organization, the efficiency flow. Actually, even bringing the people together involved in that process. Most of them have never even talked to each other. I often find when we do that, I've got the head of marketing meeting the technology person for the first time. It's hilarious. It's frightening. And these companies are making millions of pounds. But you want to create that shared understanding, that base point that we can all focus on where to go. And finally, get comfortable with uncertainty. This world is only going to get more complex. So we need to change our approach. We can't be predictive. It's about experimentation and learning, but being safe in the experiments we learn by setting boundaries, both in terms of cost, risk level, and people, so we can learn fast, move fast, and win. And then by adapting these principles, you'll be able to start to build that adaptive and responsive and resilient lean enterprise. Thank you very much.